guys! Guess what? I'm finally doing it. I'm finally starting a movement. And to be a good movement, I need to have a slogan that's worthy of putting on a sign. This should convince the people, right?
I have a brand name, how do I get people to give it attention? Take it to Photoshop, type it out, and draw a circle around it, maybe then people will notice. Companies want a way to make their brand stand out, and what better way to do that than some graphic art with some words on it? Logos are a way for people to remember a brand outside of the name itself. Sure, the brand's name alone might be enough to spur interest, so if you type it out in Arial font, it doesn't feel as exciting. It's technically a logo since all you need is a word you can read, but still, it's fucking Arial font. But if you take that Arial font and added some shapes and colors, and look, now you can read that text with some style. I wouldn't think of eating at Red Robin if the name was in Times New Roman, but pretty those words up and suddenly I know where I'm eating for dinner tonight. Video games know how important this is, as they must put in something to accompany the box art while at the same time showing their game's title in the most presentable manner possible. A video game's box art is generally the thing that most people will think of when a game is brought up, and it's the first thing people see when picking up a game. But within that box art is the game's logo, an artistic rendition of the game's title, and the way to give the box art a name to accompany it. It's a heavy contributor in making the box art the image that will represent the game, so naturally, the logo should be able to do the same thing to represent the game. Unlike box art, however, the logo can be used outside of the box art, including the title screen of the game, one of the first things you see when starting it up. Since logos are a bunch of artistic uses of text, that puts the logo into position of the messenger. It sends the message on what the game is going to be about with or without the box art, for better or worse. Now, technically the game's title is the only thing you need to make the game logo, meaning you could just type your game title, call the logo, smack it on the game's box art, and congratulations, you have a complete game cover. You could do that, but you can definitely do more to make the logo visually appealing at all times, and it's more important than you might think. To be a good game logo, one must be attention-grabbing, can send a clear message, be a good representation of the overall game, and can look good anywhere. Atari did only a few of those things. The Atari 2600 games have some gorgeous box art, but without a title, you wouldn't know what this game belongs to. And here's the issue here. The titles don't do enough to even qualify as logos. First off, the titles don't stand out. In most of the box art, the font used for the game's title is the same for the entire box. Though, some Atari games did try to make them stand out. The title is sometimes the largest size text of the entire box, but other times, the size and or color are almost the same as some of the other text that could be mistaken for the title. Furthermore, it feels as though one or two fonts were used for the text on the boxes. It's almost as if people just typed whatever they were told to type and called it a day. It doesn't represent the game's overall vibe, and if you separate them from the box art, they just feel like random words. On a positive note, at least it doesn't take attention away from the artwork since it takes up its own space on the box. To be fair, not all Atari 2600 games do this with their titles, as there were some creative fonts on their boxes, but we'll go over that later. For now, let's go over to the NES black box art and the North American Sega Master System boxes where the written titles aren't much better. Again, it seems as if they just typed up something and smacked it on the box using the same font every time. I will give it this, at least it gives the image a name, but if the box art doesn't tell me what Clue Clue Land even is, what makes you think the written title will do the job? All it's doing here is telling me what the name of the game is along with where the sprites on the box came from, and that's pretty much it. This is a phenomenon I'll refer to as pre-installed font syndrome. If I can go on Microsoft Word and find a pre-installed font closely similar to the logos, that's what I would consider a generic looking logo font. Now, that doesn't mean the logo is terrible if it looks like pre-installed font, since it could be the starting point to the final logo. It just could stand to do a lot more in a lot of cases, and thankfully, there are solid attempts. But with logos like these, it was all understandable, as it was the early days of video games, so companies were mostly focused on the art and not much else. If you can read the game's title, that's good enough.
If I can read this, you can read this too.
Though like I said earlier, the generic looking font on the box art titles was only in North America. The Japanese boxes, however, were a whole different story. They had beautiful box art and the titles on them don't look like they type it out and call it a day. They look like actual logos because of how artistic they look. But this style of game titles did not stay in Japan for long, as later games for the NES, on top of getting more unique box art, started embracing the more creative logos as well. These logos displayed the game's titles in ways that made them stand out and give you an idea what the game could be like. Sure, pre-installed font syndrome is still present, but most of the time, the logos complemented the overall tone of the box art. It felt like a perfect attention-grabbing harmony. The artwork does the heavy work bringing people in while the logo gives it a name to attach to that artwork, but both do their part in keeping the game in people's minds. So it should be no surprise that the improved logos of the latter half of the NES's life started to have an impact on how the game's logo should help with the game's overall identity. The SNES and Genesis really took this to heart, as every box art of that era had unique art. This also applied to the logos, which also thematically matches the box art. Some logos look so good that sometimes the logo alone is also the box art, like you see in a lot of early Zelda games. Ni no Kuni in its original PS3 release did this too. And then you have Phalanx, where the art and logo still confuse me. And Phalanx brings me to something that's also a byproduct of early gaming. For example, here is Super Mario Bros. Title as seen in the box art, and here it is in game. For God's sake, Super Mario Bros., just pick one! Now, this type of inconsistency isn't too bad if you're talking about the Black Box NES games, Game Boy games, and North America's Sega Master System games. But when we get to the latter half of the NES library and some of the SNES library, it makes you ask questions. You could sometimes chalk that up to hardware limitations, since it wouldn't be possible to recreate a logo exactly like what's on the box. Mega Man's logo on the box and the one in-game have the same font, except the color is different. The general shape of the logo still matches, so it's still good, which is why in-game Game Boy logos get a bit of a pass due to the lack of color. But then we have instances where the changes are significant. What are you trying to tell me, Super Ghouls and Ghosts? The limited hardware made recreating box art logos sometimes difficult, as the shapes and colors in the box art logo might not be possible in-game if it can't be recreated as a sprite in a way that looks natural. You can only do so much on 8 and 16-bit systems. Thankfully, the inconsistent logos started coming to an end when we reached the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 era. With better hardware comes with the ability to render pre-made static images, meaning artists won't have to waste time making 2 logos when they could just make one, using the extra time on more important things. And some logos can get even more dynamic with their animations on the title screen. For example, here's Klonoa Dorta Phantoma's logo at work. Good timing too, because a lot of the logos in this era are very iconic to the franchises that had games in this era. Guess which Mario Party I'm zooming in on? That's right, it's not Mario Party, it's Mario Golf. Pre-installed font syndrome is still occasionally present, but at least the artist can sprinkle in an effect or two here and there to do some cool stuff to it to make it less generic. And then when we move on from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, there was a leap in power so that logos made by an artist can be recreated in pixel art so that they match. Sprite artists, I salute your efforts to work with colors and pixels. Getting into the 6th generation of consoles, that was when we could easily separate the men from the boys in terms of memorable logo design. It is also a time where lots of new franchises come into the scene with their own logos, and existing ones evaluate their staying power. Thus, a lot of these logos tend to be the standard for some series in the future, if they haven't already done that in previous generations. For example, this is the logo for Super Smash Bros. On Nintendo 64, and here is Melee's. Notice the differences? Now take a look at every Smash Bros. Logo since Melee, and you probably notice how much in common they have with each other. This generation started the use of patterns in terms of series logos, if previous generations didn't establish that already. These tend to have a few quirks that consistently show up in subsequent games of a series. Sometimes these take the form of fonts. The fonts found in most Mario games and every Sonic games are so identifiable, they're pretty iconic. Not every Mario game uses the same font, but those are far and few in between. Sonic, however, knows how to keep font consistent. If that letter O in Sonic's name looks any different even once, f***ing run. Some series logos could look different, but have one or two things that are common with the others. Going back to Smash's logos, every game since Melee uses the Smash Brothers symbol in place of the letter O, and they have a similar general layout of the game's title and subtitle. Every main Persona game since Persona 3 had the letter P and a game's number. It didn't matter if the logos look any different style-wise. As long as the letter P is accompanied by a number and the game's title is visible, you know you're playing a Persona title past Persona 3. However, even this far into history are series that never settled on a consistent series-wide logo or common items for every logo. Some game series change their logo significantly each time there's a new entry, usually to fit the overall tone of the game or to give them their own identity. Some series can get away with this because they have measures to make sure that 2 games with different logos are from the same series. The most common method is the use of numbers, and Resident Evil is one such franchise that does this, since their logos would make a terrible spot the difference game. Having a recognizable name also helps, because then you could get away with changing logos. It didn't matter if Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2's logos look significantly different from logos from GTA 3 onwards. This is why several Mario game logos don't feel as jarring compared to the usual Mario logos. These include Mario Kart from DS onwards, New Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Maker, and Super Mario Party. The perks of having a recognizable name is that you're kind of free to do something different with the logo now and then. The Pokemon games always had this yellow logo, but 2 games in the entire series do not. Pokken Tournament straight up didn't have the word Pokemon in the title, so the series logo was omitted and Pokken's logo was stylized in the same vein as Tekken, Japanese characters and all. Pokemon Legends Arceus kept the general font of the Pokemon logo, but did something different with it, and you know what that means? It's f***ing blue! That said, without any measures to let people know, however, you run the risk of people believing a series is much smaller than it actually is. And who better to do that than Namco's Tales series? Each title in the series begins with the word Tales of, and if you think it sounds generic, you're not wrong. There are games that are not even made by Namco that begin with those exact words. But still, even with a title with the first 2 words being generic, Namco would take measures to separate their tales from other companies who name their games Tales, right? I wonder if there's a job opening for Namco's Western marketing team. Almost every game in the entire series has a different logo, and the only time two logos are similar is if one is a direct sequel to each other, like Tales of Xillia 1 and 2. And just to get this out of the way, this Tales of Destiny 2 is the true sequel to Tales of Destiny that never left Japan. The one we got in North America is actually known as Tales of Eternia in Japan. It is commonly believed that it was changed to avoid trademark infringement from Mattel in North America for the Masters of the Universe toy line. But the actual reason is brand recognition, since Tales of Destiny and Tales of Eternia don't sound like they're from the same series. This makes sense since Tales of Destiny was the first game in the series to come to the States, and at the time, this was the first available starting point for the series for North Americans. The name change served as a tell for Western players to know that Tales of Eternia was in the same series as Tales of Destiny. And this is reflected in the logo, where it retained the style of Eternia's logo even with the name change. This did not last that long, however, as the next Tales game to reach the West was Tales of Symphonia, and they didn't rename it to Tales of Destiny 3. This is weird because brand recognition was the very reason they changed Tales of Eternia's name in North America, so what was stopping them from changing Symphonia to Destiny 3? Who else would use the Symphonia name if Namco did it?
A symphony band, probably.
What doesn't help is that they do nothing to give clues on what the game is about alongside its title. You know, the thing that the Legend of Zelda series does with their logos as well? Best examples include Phantom Hourglass, Majora's Mask, and Breath of the Wild. All have items that relate to what the title entails. With the Tales series, explain to me what in these logos can tell me what a Symphonia is, or a Xillia, Graces, Vesperia. You see my gripe here? Tales of Berseria might have the silhouette of the game's protagonist Velvet, but how does her silhouette tell me what a Berseria is? Because of all these differing logos and overall strange quirks that might not make sense at face value, this could create confusion for people who never knew about the series outside of Symphonia. Why did I specifically call out Symphonia, the game that gave the series the initial Western push? You know how in some circles of Smash speculation where Symphonia's protagonist Lloyd Irving is mentioned, he's from the Tales of Symphonia series? As if he comes from a series where every game is named Tales of Symphonia? Yeah, apparently games like Tales of Vesperia, Tales of Xillia, and Tales of Arise are not from the same series to some people, and there could be a multitude of reasons, but the differing logos per game might be a factor here. In my opinion, this is an example of unique logos for every game in the series sort of backfiring, as the Tales series didn't get much attention for years until Tales of Arise in 2021. Sure, Tales is a long ongoing series, but if you look at every single Tales game by itself, would you know that based on the box art and logo alone, who exactly wins here?
Who?
I gotta commend the Tales series logos though. It takes a lot of thought to create essentially differing logos for each game. But that's too much work. I want a game logo while making little new assets as possible. You got me covered, right, SpongeBob? You know how licensed games work. Property name alone tends to be enough to ensure a sale in a lot of cases. This is true now as it was in the 6th generation, where licensed games were at their peak. And what do you know, these properties have their own logos. The use of their logos is pretty much required since the license owners have to approve everything both the publisher and developer presents them. They're likely provided a brand bible. You gotta follow it no matter what, and that includes the use of their logos. If I'm planning on playing an Ed and Eddie game, you better make damn sure that the Ed and Eddie logo is on the box art. Code Lyoko, I better see that logo or Xana's gonna have a conniption. A Family Guy video game without the Family Guy logo is worse than the time I was excited for Violet's reveal for Smash. Now, most licensed games, usually movie tie-ins, can simply take the logo and slap it on a box where they see fit and they'd be done. But if it has an additional subtitle, then it's a simple matter of stylizing it to fit the overall style of the property, and hey look, they delivered. There are exceptions, such as the 2 South Park games, The Stick of Truth and The Fractured Butthole. The exact South Park logo is not used here, but since it's out on retail like that, it's fine. Things were looking good in the realm of logos, but when we get to the 7th generation of consoles of the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii, this is where logos start taking a hit. If you thought pre-installed font syndrome was slowing to a crawl in the last generation, oh boy, it started to pick up, but in different ways, as in just type something out and fill with it to match with the game's vibe, and that's pretty much it. Some logos started doing the minimalist approach where it's just the title and not much else. Even if a game isn't using pre-installed font like most of the Wii series games, it still feels like they just typed it out and called it a day, just with the added step of making the font beforehand. But as gaming started to attract bigger audiences, we have to talk about the dreaded type of box art. Ladies and gentlemen, the horror. Box art that mostly feels like it's just marketing, usually a guy walking towards you, pretty much like almost every other modern box art. Because of covers like these, the logo pretty much has to send that message more than ever to stop people thinking it could be for absolutely any game. Doom 2016's box art makes me sad. Because of how generic the box art looks, the logo is now doing the heavy work of grabbing your attention, because without that Doom logo, someone out there could easily mistake this for Halo. Now, if the game is an ongoing series, then they could probably get away with generic looking box art as long as the logo is good. A Call of Duty logo without the usual font is suspicious. Doom 2016's logo is basically the original Doom but more flat, and BioShock Infinite, though slightly different from the other games, at least fits the tone of the game. But to everyone else that does the generic looking box art for their game, the logo better do much to make up for or I'm gonna forget their game's existence.
Score 1 for the anime crowd.
Of course, since this is the Wii era, we have to take a look at shovelware. Shovelware are games that are made on the cheap, so logically that should apply to the logos, right? Some shovelware comes in the form of licensed games, meaning the property's logo is just enough. But what about the shovelware that comes in the form of original titles? I can certainly tell you the total effort needed to make the game is mostly focused on the logo and the box art. You hear that, Data Design Interactive, with your copy-paste platformers? You think unique box art and logos will let you get away with having the same game over and over again? Each word of Action Girls Racing looks like they belong to 3 different games. Chicken Shit looks like pre-installed font but replaced an O with an egg and the K grew a toe. And Game Party's logo is actually not too bad.
Game Party needs a remake badly.
This is also the era where remasters of games from previous generations started popping up while remakes and re-releases started becoming more popular. It's time to revisit older games on newer systems, so how does one display such a game on store shelves? To get the obvious out of the way, ports don't have to do much work, as they can just use the same logo from the original release. But then we get to remasters and remakes, and that's where it starts to get tricky. If the game is a remake, the most popular thing to do with the logos is to take the original and spruce it up to really sell it being a remake. Sometimes these changes are small, like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, while others are significant, like the Resident Evil 2 Remake. And if the series has changed logo since the original, the new logo applies to the remakes, like with Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia, the remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden. Catherine is my favorite example of a significant change in logo. The original had letter sizes all over the place, which really tells you how much of a mess Vincent's love life is. And then we get to its remake/enhanced port, Catherine Full Body, where the developers wanted the title to sound more racy to show it has more content. So, a Victoria's Secret catalog provided the answer. When we get to remasters, however, they could go either way. Since remasters tend to be older games but prettied up and sometimes polished and having quality of life changes, the logo remains the same, but they use the word remastered, HD, or some other words that indicate such, and slap it on there to let people know that yeah, this is a remaster. Okay, to be fair, the little remaster blurb gets a little makeup to fit in with the base logo. And then Bound for Bikini Bottom Rehydrate made the subtitle larger than the series logo when the original put them on equal ground. But have you noticed that starting from this generation, some logos started to disregard readability? Single word titles don't fall into this issue as much unless you're like me and somehow have been misreading Sifu's logo as STFU. Regardless, if we can read it, it should be fine, but the way we naturally read things is left to right, top to bottom. The words in your logo should usually be arranged so that it's natural how you would mention the game's title. Who looked at Resident Evil 4's logo and said, oh man, I want to play 4 Resident Evil? Thank God the remake doesn't do this. And when the subtitle is significantly larger than the series title, that raises more questions than answers. But sometimes the word arrangement can be confusing. Some cases like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 are fine once you pick up what the title is. But others are just weird. I can't wait to play Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. What am I supposed to do at Trigger Happy Havoc Danganronpa? The official title for this Kingdom Hearts game is 358 Days Over 2. How does the math work here? BlazBlue Cross Tag Battles logo is different style-wise from every other BlazBlue game, but since it's a crossover between Arc System published games, it's fine. But have you seen the monstrosity that is its early logo? What is Blaze Cross Tag Blue Cross Battle? It just doesn't make any sense. It's like using 4 eyes to show the number 4 instead of the actual Roman numeral. Someone who designed Call of Duty Black Ops 4's logo really loved the letter I. The .hack series is a special case of this because technically you can read the logo in its entirety. If you're reading the title through plain text, however, you're not going to realize that the dot is part of the title. This is where the logo does its job because the word dot is in that dot to let you know, yeah, the dot is part of the title. It'd be like Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE's logo and not knowing music enough to read that as #FE. As someone who was a band kid in high school, how do I feel about that?
You uncultured swine! This is not a hashtag!
Speaking of readability, here's an example of a logo that's alright by itself, but it became weird when put onto the box. When I look at Guilty Gear Strive's logo alone, I thought nothing of it, it's fine. But when I see that same logo on the box art, when did I get Guilty Gear Strive? The G's in the logo almost blend in with the red background, and you'd likely not notice them if looked at far enough. The G in Gear is slightly more visible since it's in front of something not red, but it's not much better. Then again, if you see Soul Bad Guy and Kai Keese in the box art, it's obviously a Guilty Gear game, but not being able to read the logo fully can create confusion. Also, if you're curious, the spine's even worse when housing the logo. Though sometimes disregarding readability can give us some crazy stuff. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is clever once you see the Roman numerals, and Capcom wanted to show that off by highlighting them. Resident Evil 8 Village also did the same thing, which is also cool, but it loses a small bit of points by making the word village above the series title, not following the natural reading order. Other than that, it's fine. Of course, by telling you about the readability of logos, I'm assuming you could read English, which is what all of the logos we have been seeing up to this point are in. What about the rest of the world? I'm going to be mostly talking about Japanese versions, but do know that other countries have similar cases as well. In fact, as video games started to reach more countries, some companies went through the trouble of translating the titles, modifying the logo accordingly. Before then, titles are either written in English or Japanese. Most of them are written in English, even in the Japanese version. Sometimes they put in the katakana below the logo so that if Japanese children can't read the English, they can at least read the Japanese below it, even if it can risk being missed. Sometimes it's the reverse. And if the title is different in certain countries, the logo tends to keep the general style while having their own twist, as you can see with Super Smash Bros. Brawl for example. That consistency can help with European English spelling of certain words. The logos for the American and European versions of Sonic Colors are almost identical in pixel length, even with the added letter U in the European logo. That is a graceful logo if I've ever seen one. But then we get to radically different logos for each language, as you can see with Mario Parties 2 through 8. In America, the numbers follow the same general Mario font. In Japan, someone probably hated how the numbers looked in the Mario font and made their own. Resonance of Fate has a nice logo, but that was localized from its Japanese name, End of Eternity. Let's see how they did with the Japanese version. Well, it looks like funeral homes can't use End for Eternity. Now we're into the modern era of gaming, and look at the logos of today. This is the era of simplification, where companies start to take their artistic logos and turn them into something you can conjure up in Microsoft Paint in about 5 minutes at most. The use of simpler shapes, fewer colors, and the resurgence of pre-installed font syndrome, all that gives you a reason why it feels like a regression not just for game logos, but for logos in general. It's almost as if the higher-ups were all like, everyone these days is stupid, let's dumb our logos down. Have you seen Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War's logo? This is Action Girls Racing 2.0, where 3 different fonts are used and they only did one thing on the 3rd font. The first 2 fonts are fine, they're the usual Call of Duty Black Ops fonts, but they just had to introduce the 3rd for Cold War. Rainbow Six Siege isn't much better, just slightly more editing involved. And generic font isn't exclusive to criticism towards the actual game for not being original enough. Even good games aren't immune to generic logo font. The most recent example is the Pikmin series. The old logo used to have flowers to make up the letters, but starting with Pikmin 4 and the Switch remasters of Pikmin 1 and 2, they switched to this bold plain text. This goes as far as updating Pikmin 3 Deluxe so that the home icon changes the logo to the current one, even though the box art and title screen retain this old style of Pikmin logo. Want another example of logo changing weirdness? Take Spider-Man PS4's logo for example. The box art is generic enough, the logo isn't helping things. You mean to tell me that the Spider-Man logo that you have been using since 2005 and the one you use for the recent movies aren't game-worthy and you decide to make a new one just for this game? These type of logos tend to be seen for mostly Western AAA games for older audiences, and they're fine, but they could do so much more to make them both readable and exciting. I specify games targeted for older audiences because games like Crash Bandicoot, Ratchet & Clank, and Rayman all appeal to a broader audience and they had something cool with their logos. And it's not like mature games can't do pretty logos, because they can certainly do that. We got God of War PS4, Red Dead Redemption 2, hell if even Cyberpunk 2077 can do cool looking text, why can't Call of Duty? Of course, it's not all doom and gloom, and 2 groups of games seem to know this. Indie games tend to be the more artistic games, and it reflects well in their logos. Undertale reflects the art style well, and the heart is a nice touch since it's basically the series icon. Cuphead greatly captures that feel of the early golden age of American animation. Both Ori games reflect the mystical nature of the games, and A Hat in Time is just cute. As for this second group, this might be the weeb in me talking, but the logos for most Japanese games is overall nicer, to the point where even logos that looks like pre-installed text has a lot more going for it. Didn't have to be a lot, but if it compares the death loop on stuff done to the text, it's pretty okay. Like Battle in Wonderworld is one of the worst things humanity has done, but at least the logo is nice to look at. Not everything from Japanese games were winners, however. Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD is too uniform compared to the games before it. Even the original Banana Blitz had more going for it. And then Banana Man decided to go wild. And inconsistent logos between the box and tile screen might occasionally pop up into developers with feeling artistic, as seen with Danganronpa 2 and V3. But the company with some of the most fun logos, in my opinion, has got to be Nintendo's. Just take a look at the Nintendo published Switch games alone. Super Mario Odyssey has a globe in place of the letter O to hint at globetrotting. The word golf has the golf ball texture for Mario Golf Super Rush, which, take a look at what you're playing here. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has so many details related to the game, like the ancient feel of the font, the flowers, and the rusted Master Sword. Metroid Dread's logo has the second word live up to itself with the way it's drawn out. Splatoon 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, ARMS, Yoshi's Crafted World, even Pokemon Sword and Shield, I could keep going. Every now and then we have some logos that are fine but a bit too safe, but you know, it's never that bad. But like I said, the logo's purpose is to send a message and to represent the product or brand. The logo and box art kind of have a symbiotic relationship to get the game to the potential customer. But in my opinion, the logo has a bit of a larger role, as that art is not always going to be available and that message has to be sent through multiple mediums. Companies know that their logo has to send a message, which is why the ones that are generic looking is concerning. While every logo is pretty much marketing at the end of the day, some feel like they just want to show you the game's title and that's pretty much it. But when you get artistic and detailed, it makes them just as memorable as the box art for their creative use of text to show the game's title in the most presentable fashion possible. And when you see them, they might just be ingrained in your memories, enough so that you'll probably won't need the box art when thinking of a game. Details make the world go round after all. There's a hidden arrow in FedEx's logo, for example, that blows your mind once you see it, so let's see if Street Fighter 6's logo does the same thing. Doesn't look too memorable, it's fine, but let's see what happens if you turn it 90 degrees. Oh, that's so much better.
Man, all this talk about logos and fonts made me realize that people do love fonts and words with art. That's the goal of my movement, because certain fonts are not treated as respectfully as others. Arial and Times New Roman fonts have got the spotlight for far too long. If Comic Sans and Papyrus can have their moment, then it's time for a new font to rise up. Please embrace the new font of the century. I'm on Team Tahoma!